This is Ethnic Stew, a new podcast on race and ethnic relations from the standpoint of parents and grandparents of biracial children. Here are your hosts, John Glavin, J.P. Kendall, and Jill Kendrick.
Colleges and universities are taking a beating these days, being accused of acting as bastions of what many people are mistakenly calling woke culture. Now, being woke used to mean being alert to racial prejudice and discrimination, then came to encompass a broader awareness of social inequalities. The term has now become a pejorative by the far right, sneering at what they claim are leftist concepts ranging from identity politics to white privilege and even critical race theory. The original definition, I assume, is something we should all aspire to be, that is, being alert to racial prejudice and discrimination. Going with that definition, JP, Jill, and I looked at a few instances in which the concept of being woke has been turned on its head. On campuses in Oregon, North Carolina, and Illinois, students who disagreed with their instructors tried to silence them. The three instances are all different, but with one thing in common. The students didn't like what they heard. And instead of challenging directly, they took their grievances to administration and, in at least one instance, instigated a campaign of lies about the instructor's family life. And the consequences? Well, it ain't pretty. Let's get to it. First guy, Mike Adams, was a criminology professor at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington, an outspoken conservative. Adams was the subject of a campaign to get him fired. In one post, Adam wrote, "Don't shut down the university, shut down the non-essential majors like women's studies."
Oh.
Yeah. In the open letter to the University of North Carolina at Wilmington, academics and students wrote, "Professor Adams hides behind the veil of free speech, but through his rhetoric on Twitter and his column, he has harassed, threatened, and spread hateful speech against students and faculty." To get rid of him, the school reached a settlement with Adams to have him retire early in August 2020 in exchange for a little over $500,000 paid out over the course of 5 years to cover lost salary and retirement benefits. But he would never collect the full settlement because in July of that year, he was found dead at his home, died of a gunshot wound. Coroners would later confirm was self-inflicted.
Yikes.
One of his colleagues appeared to minimize Adams' death. He tweeted, "Please do mourn Mike Adams' death, but don't sugarcoat his rhetoric as merely controversial or racially charged. He was blatantly racist, homophobic, and sexist, and his own words left no room for interpretation on any of that." Yeah, what he said was repugnant. Is it worthy of being fired? I don't know.
It's First Amendment rights. You might not like it, but he still has the right to say what he wants to say.
And this guy seems to be a provocateur and kind of enjoyed tweaking noses.
Yeah.
This next gentleman, Peter Boghossian at Portland State, it was revealed that together with fellow academics, James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, he had been submitting ludicrous academic papers to social science journals to see whether they would be published. The three of them submitted the papers to prove that modern social sciences had a problem with academic rigor, along with weakening standards for what was considered good research. So he was essentially showing that research papers, as long as they're what they termed politically correct, would be published.
Right.
And without peer review.
Right.
But the students at Portland State disliked how the professor prioritized diversity of thought in his classroom. Now, we'll remind everybody that that's from Portland, which is, you know, supposedly this much more liberal environment. They didn't like it because they felt he prioritized diversity of thought.
Isn't that what an educator is supposed to do?
Thank you. So he was the target of harassment. including graffiti in the shape of a swastika featuring his name, and a Title IX probe that alleged that he beat his wife and children.
Wow. Getting into the weeds.
Well, yeah, the probe went nowhere, but he was required to attend school-mandated coaching and was banned from teaching things, this is a quote, in a way that might reveal his views on protected classes.
Oh, man. It kind of goes back to what we got going on now with speak what we tell you to speak and speak only that. And you're sending these kids to get education to, like you were saying before, diversity of thought. You can think as much as you want as long as it's what I want to hear.
Exactly. Yeah. You have the freedom to speak as long as it's
what I want you to hear.
Yeah. And on top of this, because they didn't like the truth, they went a step further and created the lies about the problems within his marriage and his family. So he resigned. Part of the note in his resignation, he said, Portland State University has failed in fulfilling its duty to free thought. In doing so, it has failed not only its students, but the public that supports it. While I'm grateful for the opportunity to have taught at Portland State for over a decade, it's become clear to me that this institution is no place for people who intend to think freely and explore ideas. People intend to think freely and explore ideas. Isn't that what school is about? It's learning how to learn, really.
Yes.
But it's not about learning things by rote, but in addition to learning new ideas, it's debating them in exchanging ideas, and only by exchanging ideas and picking them apart can you learn whether they're quackery or worthy of further discussion.
Yeah. Well, you got to stop and think too. Also, some of the people's justifications of for and against of how they go into that.
And it's disturbing how they go to, it's not enough that you disagree, but there's the attitude of leaving no prisoners.
Yes.
And that's what bothers me in these colleges. I mean, they go out of their way to try and ruin the lives of these people.
Right.
Just because they disagree.
Yeah.
Did I understand correctly that the first gentleman you talked about, he was too far right thinking for the people in his university?
Yes, he was to the political right.
And they ran him out.
Yep.
In a far right, well, maybe not where he lived, maybe not. But then in Portland, a guy who was more liberal thinking, trying to be more free thinking, trying to generate new thoughts, new ideas, was run out for being too free thinking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, to me, this just shows that the far right and the far left are far out.
Yeah.
Far out.
Yeah.
There has to, and like we've talked before, there has to be a middle ground. People maybe, I don't know that us, but I'm saying more like us who want to hear both sides, who want to come to an honest agreement. Like in Indiana, they have started taking books out of libraries. There can't be books about
race theory,
gender, nuclear race theories, this and that. They've taken those books out of a lot of libraries. So what's happening, I'm hoping that the younger generation in Indiana can get their acts together, because what kind of happened when that happened, the kids who want to know have made more of an effort to get the information and learn about it and make their own decisions, which I see as a positive. Like I see that as a positive outcome of bad decisions by people who are doing it for political motivation, not the common good of all.
Well, and especially books that are clearly satire, like Huck Finn.
Yeah.
Where he decides not to tell on Jim, the runaway slave, and his best friend, and he says, I don't care if I'm called a low-down abolitionist. And he said, and he said, it made me feel better. And so the wonderful irony that he feels low down for being what society says is wrong, but he also is feeling better about his friendship and about the loyalty.
Right.
People wanted to ban that.
People, they wanted to take away books and images that depicted slavery and that type of thing. Now people are saying that's the way our country was. And now there's a lot more people to stand up and say that's the way things were. And now you got a group of people trying to say, well, we don't need to know that side of history. All we need to know is the history that I set before you. Well, that's not history telling. Then they don't understand why kids don't want to trust them, is because you're leaving out huge chunks of information, and it's not going to make me feel bad about myself. What I'm hearing from white kids, it's good, bad, and ugly, warts and all. And you want to spoon feed me, and it makes him feel, from the ones that I've talked to, it makes him feel like they can't handle things.
I think it's sad when you have people who care about education, true education. And college really just means you're trainable. I feel like when you are forcing people out who are trying to teach a point of view, like maybe his point of view, the guy in Portland, is really think for yourself. Here
was the last example, and I think that this ties everything together, and this is racial in perspective. And this was a professor at the John Marshall Law School at U of I, Chicago, University of Illinois at Chicago. His name is Jason Kilborn. He wrote a civil procedure exam based on an employment discrimination hypothetical. The question referred to the use of racial and sexual epithets, but rather than use the words, Kilborn used commonly censored versions of just the first letter and blanks. In doing that, he was suspended at the school.
Yikes.
The use of the censored references led to a complaint in a letter from the Black Law Students Association, and later a petition which called for Kilborn to be stripped of his committee assignments and other reforms. This is a direct quote from the petition. The slur shocked students, created a momentous distraction, and caused unnecessary distress and anxiety for those taking the exam. Considering the subject matter and the call of the question, the use of the N word and B word was certainly unwarranted, as it did not serve any educational purpose. The question was culturally insensitive and tone deaf. It lacked basic civility and respect for the student body, especially considering our social justice efforts this year. This was back in, I believe, 2020. The integration of this dark and vile verbiage on a Civil Procedure 2 exam was inexcusable, and appropriate measures of accountability must be executed by the UIC administration. Now, the president of the campus BLSA chapter, Black Law Students Association, who's not a student of the professors, said during her own speech, and this is a quote, "We do not feel safe. Students have come together to write demands for the law school, starting with the termination of his tenured professor, stating that tenure is not immunity for discriminatory practices." Here is the question from the exam, and I'm reading it verbatim. After she was fired from her job, plaintiff sued employer under federal civil rights law, claiming employment discrimination on the basis of her race and gender. Employer also revealed that one of the plaintiff's former managers might have damaging information about the case, but no one at employer knew where that former manager was, since she had abruptly quit her job at employer several months ago and had not been heard from since. With nothing to go on but the manager's name, employer's lawyer pieced together several scraps of information and concluded that this former manager must be located in a remote area of northern Wisconsin. Employer's lawyer spent $25,000 to hire a private investigator who successfully located the former manager in northern Wisconsin. Employer's lawyer traveled to meet the manager, who stated that she quit her job at employer after she attended a meeting in which other managers expressed their anger at plaintiff, calling her an N-word and a B-word, profane expressions for African Americans and women, and vowed to get rid of her. Later, plaintiff's lawyer served another discovery demand omitted and an interrogatory demanding the identity and location of any person with any information related to the termination of plaintiff's employment at employer or potential discrimination against plaintiff by employer or any agent of employer. Can employer identify the former manager but properly withhold her location, as this is the product of a significant amount of work and expense by employer's attorney? So it's important to note that this entire controversy began with an exam question on an employment discrimination case that censored terms to avoid discomfort or insult.
Wow.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
How did we get here? How do we get here from there?
Well, exactly. The question had been used in different settings on the professor's law school classes for 10 years in a row before this became a controversy.
But the times have changed. JP, you've mentioned this before, and probably should throw the ball to you, but you've mentioned it before, that with some of the controversy that has happened, certain people react differently now to things, words. But I'm shocked that he would have lost his job or been called a lot because he was simply posing a question that would have been within the realm of what he was teaching. And he put that in there by not using the exact words. I don't see how that became a problem because he's not saying it himself. He's using the context of
imposing it,
what
in
happened
the context
to the
of a question.
This is a real world problem that has come up before.
Yeah.
Now, let me read the professor's explanation of the context using the question. He said, employment discrimination is amongst the most common topics of federal civil litigation. And our textbook authors use that context frequently, so it's certainly appropriately contextual.
Right.
I was also trying to acknowledge the challenges that women of color still face in the workplace and the important role of civil procedure in discovering and addressing these wrongs. The only question seems to be whether it was problematic for me to be specific in abbreviated form to avoid actually using these horrible words about what the manager had heard others say.
Yeah.
I don't want to make anyone feel unnecessarily distressed during a high-stakes exam, but I am flabbergasted at the reaction here for the first time in 10 years of consistently administering this very question to classes every bit as diverse as the one that sat for this exam this semester, though I have no idea who is reacting in this way or why, as no one from the leadership of this campaign against me has attempted to communicate with me in any way.
This sounds like a witch hunt. This sounds like a situation where they had a reason. They wanted a reason to get rid of this guy, and they found it. Well, they manufactured it out of this, because as I sit here and I see no wrong in what he said or what he done. That's just like banning a book for using the actual words. Answer this question. This scenario comes up in a courtroom situation, an actual case. How would they word it then?
To me, the actual words would have been more infuriating than the leading letters. And the thing of it is, it's not him saying it. It's a question that is depicting a real life case that happens all the time.
Yes.
How would they write that up in a court setting, an actual case setting? How would that? I
think it would have had the actual word. It would have had the actual word.
Yes.
Okay, so then you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
According to a statement by the Black Law Students Association, for instance, one student read the exam question and said he felt like he, quote, no longer belonged at the law school, unquote.
Oh, my goodness.
Another student said she'd experienced heart palpitations.
Fuck up, Buttercup.
You would hear things way worse than that. Wait,
Buck up, Buttercup.
Well, yeah,
so
I mean,
I'm just saying that I'm shocked that anybody in law school would be shocked or offended by that, or feel palpitations, or feel like they shouldn't be there, because that's a real life case. If that's a discrimination case from start to finish. So what do you have? All these other discrimination type cases or wrongful termination, all these things like that you have. How that's not going to be any better than, it would be far worse than what was in that question.
You work in law offices. Do you think that someone would hire a student who, if they read the N-word read about the N-word in court, would roll up in a ball and start rocking back and forth and get, and be basically unable to move forward?
I can't imagine that. Times have changed though, but I can't imagine. And I didn't do that kind of stuff, but I just can't imagine. I can't. I mean, that's what has me. I'm kind of riled up about this because I can't understand. It wasn't the whole issue, but it was why the person left, and I can't understand why. And if that's why the person left, that's why the person left. That's their prerogative.
It's the facts of the case. Very important facts of the case. My son's a paralegal in the Air Force, and I just can't see anybody reacting to that. Knowing
and
that
then the fact
young.
that there were multiple people, or supposedly multiple people.
Do they feel that? Do they feel that way when Tupac says it, or Biggie Small says it, or any of these other rappers that are running around saying that kind of crap? I just think it was a situation where somebody got notoriety out of bringing this up, and a bunch of people jumped on it, and they took off with it.
I mean, this is downtown Chicago.
Yeah.
Downtown Chicago.
Yeah, and John Marshall's a night school. It's people going after their law degree who are currently employed professionally in a night school like that. It is professionals who are doing this because this is the only time they can do it. So you don't have traditionally a bunch of 19-year-old kids. But let me throw out a hypothetical and see if you agree or disagree. When I dated my first wife and her son had just turned 3, we quickly disagreed about discipline for him. A couple of times when I tried to let him know that what he was doing was wrong, she said, no. I mean, he's had it tough, and he's been, I
was married to one of those.
And I said, look, if you treat him like a victim, he's gonna be a victim.
Yep.
To me, it's no different from when the kid, and I got my way. And when she and I divorced, she said, well, my son and I will be leaving now. And her son said, no, I'm staying with John. This is, I know I'm safe.
In the better place.
Yeah. And that's not me bragging.
Pat yourself on the back. Yeah.
That's just saying that's obviously he had learned it. But to me, it's no different from, when a kid that's small is running and falls down and scrapes the hell out of his knee, and you run and you pick him up. If you go, what my wife Melinda likes to do in situations like that, she will pound the ground and say, that bad ground made you hurt. You're fine now, aren't you? So
that's good logic. I like that.
Yeah. Or do you jump up and you cuddle him and you say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? What's the kid? Which one is going to get the kid back up and moving quicker?
The first one.
It's the one where you say, you're okay, right? It's okay.
Yeah.
Look. And I've done that. Like if one of the kids stubs their toe, I'll say like, bad chair.
There you go. To me, these students are butthurt. And I know that sounds awfully hard, but somewhere somebody told them they got the idea that they were victims. And I think John Lewis, when he was getting the hell kicked out of him on the Edmund Pettus Bridge,
yeah,
did he start crying and saying that this was unfair?
Nope.
No.
We got to mark some more.
He went right back into it. He cracked his skull open, but went right back to it. And I can't help but think that the leaders in the civil rights of yesteryear would look at students who did this and say, you're throwing away all this hard work that we've done.
Yeah.
You missed the point. You missed the point.
Yeah.
You guys have missed the point.
You're admitting, you're basically throwing in the towel and saying that the black haters were true. We're not strong. We're not capable.
You come off like a bunch of sissy la-las is what they sound out.
Well, the thing is,
crybaby pissy pants.
Yeah, I don't know how to. I wouldn't say necessarily like that, JP, because I didn't know those words. However, I would think if the person was angry about it, this is someone who is in law school. We will assume a certain level of intelligence. You would think that if you had a problem, you would address that problem and not create an entire scenario now where you're trying to wreck a professor's life over a question that had been asked for 10 years. That just means the culture has changed as to what is acceptable or not acceptable, but the words used are said on the street and probably in between that woman or man and their other friends.
I'll give you an example of culture change. When I was a little boy, we went from being, proper word was Negro, and then it was colored people, and then colored people and being called Negroes became offensive. It was almost like the N-word, because we're no longer colored people or Negroes, we're black people.
Yeah, what color?
Then African. But I remember the older generation of my family did not identify with being called black people. That who was really, now that I look back on it, because I'm a little kid growing up in the 60s, I remember when black people would say, somebody would come up to the older people and they would, do a black power signal and stuff, like, I don't play that. As time evolved, we were black people, then we're African Americans. And I hear it every once in a while. I hear older white people and black people use the term colored people. And it's just so foreign sounding now. And it's offensive. And then, but the funny thing about it, when I've seen white people use that term, the reaction from other white people was really fascinating to me because, you can see a head whip. And I've heard this word used around when people didn't know I was around. I heard it like in the crowds or on the other side of a wall. And it was funny to hear white people laugh at them, and say things like, "Why, what a hillbilly," or "What rock they've been living under," and it's, they understand that black people don't identify with that. In this case, I don't see where harm was done in a situation that was
to the girl in the classroom. To the girl in the classroom, what was the harm?
I just can't understand. Using something in such a generic way, it's like I said, I don't know how, you get there from there. I just don't know. I don't understand it. Maybe it's just me, but I just don't see it either. I just don't. Now, and also, what about forgiveness too? I mean, what about what about, corrections, gently correcting somebody or something like that, just to come out with your sword drawn and, trying to slice and dice somebody. I feel like if I say something derogatory as a black person about your race, I should be in just as much trouble as you are about saying something about my race. That is the only way it's going to be fair. I'll give a clear example. I had a coworker of mine. She heard her son, no, it was her grandson, saying the N-word. And she called him in there and started to climb his frame. But he was actually, there was a song in the background playing that she didn't hear. And he was mimicking the words to the, he was just to the song. And she didn't know that. And, she collared him. And, and he had to explain his way out of it. But she didn't know how she was supposed to react, after hearing, that scenario. So, it kind of correlates, in a way with what's happening here, Don't sing that song. Well,
let me take the story a step further. He was suspended and then investigated, which I believe, no, you investigate and then decide whether you are suspended.
Yeah.
He went on a Zoom call with a member of the BLSA. The statement after that, he said, and this is Professor Kilborn, he said, while the battle over the exam language continues, it turns out I was actively misled into believing my suspension was related to that language. I voluntarily agreed to talk to one of the Black Law Student Association members who had advanced this petition against me. Around hour 1 or 1.5 of a 4-hour Zoom call that I endured.
Yikes.
Yeah, that I endured from 5 to 9 p.m. with this young man. He asked me to speculate as to why the dean had not sent me BLSA's attack letter, and I flippantly responded, well, I suspect she's afraid if I saw the horrible things that were said about me in the letter, I'd become homicidal. Conversation continued without a hitch for 2.5 or 3 more hours, and we concluded amicably with a promise to talk more later. Apparently, the student then turned around and reported that I was a homicidal threat.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Yeah.
Our university's behavioral threat assessment team convened, and with no evidence of who I am at all, recommended to my dean that I be placed on administrative leave and barred from campus. Having full discretion to implement or reject that recommendation, and knowing me fairly well, having worked with me quite a bit for the past 4 years, my dean decided that I was indeed a homicidal threat.
Oh, man. Wow.
I'm sorry. Doesn't this need to be pushed back? Don't these students need to be shown just how ridiculous it is? Yes, held accountable.
Something like that can happen to any one of us. Any one of us.
And I feel like I'm going out on a limb as a 61-year-old white guy, even saying this, but somebody has to say it.
In fair play, when I would get upset at work, it was talked about for days. And I see people go off, throwing things, slamming, breaking equipment and whatnot. And they would say, oh, he's just upset. He'll cool off in a little bit. But I've had the postal inspectors called on me at work because I've gotten into, a heated argument with somebody, which these people have had multiple heated arguments with somebody. And the excuse I always get, well, you're a large guy, and
you're a Marine.
And and they just stopped shy of saying you're this big black guy that we're petrified of or whatever. People would come up to me weeks later and said, I heard a couple of weeks ago you got really upset and got loud with somebody, and everybody was afraid of what you might do. And I'm going, are you kidding me? We've had people that have to physically separate them, and a lot of times I felt like that I was discriminated against. Okay, so what is it you're afraid of? My size, my color, my bald head? What is it that you're afraid of when you know me? You see me every day. You know me. I'd much rather buy you a cup of coffee or buy you a Coke than to just to walk up and punch you. If I have to punch you, yeah, I will punch you. But I'd much rather we sit down and discuss this, not yell and scream, but discuss this. I'm that guy. I'd much rather do that because I know a physical altercation. I learned in martial arts years ago, you never ever really win a fight. I don't know. In this situation, I just think this guy was part of a witch hunt, in a flippant way, which, we do that little sarcasm all the time, and to have that put in that context, and it just wipes out all the great things that he probably did before. And that's what I think a lot about when I think about racism. Why would I let this one person cancel out all the other things that my white friends, my teachers, my doctors, all these people who have done things for me? Why would I allow one ignorant person to cancel out all that for, something they said or something they did? Taking consideration what they did.
His original error was he gave a test.
Gave a test. and try to use some PC.
He demanded accountability from his students.
Right.
What an incredibly revolutionary concept.
Yeah.
I'm just so saddened by this because, JP, you alluded to this, how quickly a lifetime of good work can just be completely thrown away because of either an incredible sensitivity or mistaken intentions or a combination of the two. Yeah.
This sounds more like a witch hunt to me.
Yeah.
Somewhere underlines he looked at somebody sideways and this is their return to get back with them. But they should take in consideration, is this a pattern? Is anybody else complaining about this? For Christ, what about them? This question has been on the test for 10 years. You guys just now are waking up to it. Is it a crime now because the climate, or was it 10 years ago when I started using this?
And I would assume the homicidal thing was said
That's
in jest. And
yes,
and he would have been like, oh yeah, because he would have thought that you say that in a certain kind of tone. You don't say that like you are dead serious.
Right.
Pardon the pun. You just talk about it you would be like, oh yeah, because this or this or that. That's like a comedy of errors. That whole thing is a comedy of errors. So I wonder, has he sued the university?
Initially, Jason Kilborn was told by UIC officials he had to attend sensitivity training, but he reached a resolution with UIC in July of 2021 in which he agreed to alert the dean of the law school before responding to student complaints about racial issues and to audio record his classes. Kilborn welcomed both of these stipulations in order to protect himself against spurious complaints and had already decided to take those actions independently. As part of that resolution, Kilborn and UIC ultimately reached an understanding that Kilborn would not have to attend sensitivity training. However, in November of 2021, under pressure from UIC's Black Law Students Association and Jesse Jackson, UIC reneged on its agreement with Kilborn and now demands he participate in months-long training on classroom conversations that address racism and compelling him to write reflection papers before he can return to the classroom. In a stunning display of unintended irony, the individualized training materials include the same redacted slur that Kilborn used in his test question. The head of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, or FIRE, the Faculty Legal Defense Fund, says UIC crucifies Kilborn for using a redacted slur, then turns around and forces him into anti-racism training that uses that very same slur. Kilborn is effectively showing up to re-education and being handed his own text. By requiring Kilborn to submit the ideological re-education, not only has UIC violated his rights to academic freedom, but it has also gone back on its original agreement with Kilborn. Another of his attorneys said Kilborn did nothing wrong to begin with, but UIC has done everything wrong. UIC has proved itself to be both illiberal and disingenuous, and it's past time to follow through on our threat of legal action. Kilborn has sued, and he claimed the only thing that will hold UIC accountable for its unconstitutional actions is a lawsuit. FIRE's Faculty Legal Defense Fund gave me the strong medicine of real legal action, and UIC has given me no choice but to use it. Kilborn's lawsuit was filed in U.S. District Court, Northern District of Illinois on January 27th of 2022. And as of this recording, there have been 34 motions, replies, entries, and memoranda filed. I've had an attorney look at the court docket and was told the lawsuit is nowhere near resolved. It's now high profile enough that neither side will be interested in negotiating anytime soon, and the suit will likely go on for years.
This has been Ethnic Stew, a new podcast on race and ethnic relations from the standpoint of parents and grandparents of biracial children. Next time, John, JP, and Jill continue their talk with Amy from Iran. Like Ethnic Stew on Facebook. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter and on ethnicstew.com.